Welcome to the Darkstream. Voxday, voxday.blogspot.com, and unauthorized.tv. Welcome to all the new members. Welcome to all the new unauthorized TV subscribers. Everybody behave. We got Slap Weasel on the job. The gray man is lurking. And it's all good. So, a couple announcements. First of all, we have a new emoji, which you can use if you like for bands. If you're a channel member, you can use them if you want to hail unauthorized creator David the Good, if he happens to be on the stream sometime. But he sent me over a popular emoji from his own stream, and you can see it if you type good, as in David the Good. So those of you who are gardening fans, who hold to the whole compost your enemy, then have at it. So, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. Apparently it's not working. Well, I just turned it on, so maybe I forgot to actually save it. Hang on a second. Let me take a quick look here. Actually, you know what? We will. No, it actually shows there. So I don't know why it is not appearing, but it's definitely in the mix. So we won't worry about that now. So anyhow, somebody banned Moats YT. We're not interested in gammas who are spiraling about whether the audio and the video is perfectly synced and that sort of thing. As a general rule, just shut the hell up. Okay? All that nonsense is just distraction. And so there's no need to talk about that sort of thing. He says I'm gone. Yeah, but that's not the point. The point is we don't want you around. We don't want people like you around. This is a, I won't say it's a no gamma zone, but it is a gammas be on your best behavior and don't try to hijack the mic. Don't try to start a whole side discussion, and don't try to do a live and running critique. All right? Exactly. You're in the wrong saloon. So, Carbro Bear says, besides, it's perfectly synced on my end. Yes, but it's not on his. And so therefore, the usual. What's your opinion on John Carmack and John Romero? Great respect for both of them. I'm personally acquainted with both of them. I've actually talked to John Romero. I interviewed him for my Develop Magazine column about, 10 years ago or whenever it was, 8 years ago. John Romero is a great designer, and John Carmack is one of the great technologists of the computer game industry. Id was and is a legendary developer, and that being said, I will say that like Lennon and McCartney, they did their best work together. I would have preferred them to stay together. Can I buy 10 UATV memberships at once for Christmas? No, you probably can't do it all at once. Because they're all associated with a specific email address. So what you'd have to do is you'd have to have the 10 email addresses and then you could put them all on the same credit card or whatever, but you have to do them each separately. Nothing we can really do about that. And speaking of unauthorized TV, I have an announcement which you're probably expected if you're already following Big Bear Stream today. But we are, as of today, closing down the Big Bear Stream and the Darkstream on unauthorized to subscribers only. And that doesn't mean that you can't watch it for free. They're still going to be free on BitChute. They're still going to be free as long as the replays are available on DLive. And they are still going to be available here. My streams will be available here on YouTube for 2 or 3 days to everybody. And they will remain available to all Silver Pack and higher channel members. So, and they'll remain that way more or less indefinitely. You know, I don't, as long as we have access to that. The reason for doing this is straightforward. The Android app is crushing. It's already well over 1,000 installs. It will probably be over 10,000 installs relatively soon. And there are, at present, I think 491, I'd have to check here. There are currently 491 reviews, all of which are 5-star. So thank you. And, you know, we're very glad that it's been successful to this point, but we just need to make sure that we keep things balanced in terms of the subscribers and the traffic. Should one upgrade to premium, or will they be available to any level subscribers? They will be available to all subscribers. There's no distinction. If you subscribe to David the Good, you get access to everybody. If you subscribe to Chuck Dixon, you get access to everybody. If you subscribe to Feed the Bear, you get access to everybody. You know, we're not interested in paywalling. If we were interested in paywalling, then we would not put it on BitChute. You know, it's completely free if you want it. You know, it's just if you want the unauthorized quality and if you want the direct link through our app and all that sort of thing, you know, that's the way that we've got it set up. And it's very clear that people are quite happy with that. So, you know, it was interesting because Big Bear and I had talked about it, and we talked about it a little last night, and then I went and before this stream, I went and checked on the subscriptions, and I immediately called him up and said, "Did you talk about this already?" He said, "Yeah, why?" I said, "Well, because like 50 people just signed up in the last hour." And, you know, that wasn't why we did it. You know, we weren't, is that you're providing us supports and sustains the community and vice versa. You know, we understand very well that trust and loyalty have to flow both ways. And so, Stephen Bennett says, how much does the unauthorized subscription cost? It goes from $5 a month, and then there's an annual membership of $275 a year. And they all provide access to exactly the same stuff. So, you know, Binks Webel says, but this is all supposed to be a scam. You're not scamming very well. We're not interested in scamming at all. We know what grifters look like. We know what grifters do, and we know that grifters don't last. You know, My blog, in case you're not aware, my blog has been running consistently with posts almost every single day for 16 years. It really got started. I actually created it on Blogger, I think in March 2003, but I didn't really start posting on it until October 2003. And so, we just keep building slowly, steadily, surely, and hopefully we keep increasing the quality, and we increase the amount of interesting and informative and even educational content that you enjoy. We've already got some new stuff coming. For example, Rachel Fulton Brown, Dr. Rachel Fulton Brown, is going to be launching a course on Tolkien. And it's based on the course that, or my understanding, we've talked about it, but she'll do what she does. But I believe it's going to be a expansion and an extension of the actual course that she teaches at the University of Chicago. And so this is really going to be, I think, an equally interesting intellectual adventure, and I hope that it's one that lasts even longer than the blog has. John Doe asks, will you ever stream on DLive? I've already done it twice. I wonder if it would have the same lag effect as on YouTube. It actually was a little bit worse. And so we're pretty sure that it has to do with my fine Italian internet connection. So we're working on that. By the way, speaking of Dr. Brown, we have greatness in the house. She's actually here. So welcome, Fencing Bear. Good to see you. And people are very, very stoked about your future Tolkien-related videos. So, it's going to be interesting to see how it goes. But let's talk about the subject. I mean, that's got the this covers the announcement and upkeep portion of the stream. But I was reading a book today. As you know, with Castalia Deluxe, we're producing high quality leather-bound books. So of course it behooves us to study very intensely what is out there, what's been out there. And we've been looking really hard at the old Franklin Library, which is now defunct, but has generally been considered to be the creme de la creme of the leather-bound book industry, for lack of a better word. And people say, well, why are you so interested in this? Why are you so focused on this? And it's because this is, in my opinion, one of the most important things that we can do. You and I right now are engaged in a fairly ephemeral medium. It's possible that these videos will last, but it's pretty unlikely. There's so many moving parts that need to come together and be preserved in order for people to watch these videos in the future, in 10 years, in 20 years, in 200 years. Welcome, Marima Bear. And so when you look at the books that we can read, when I look at the intellectual influences on my life, most of them, not all of them, but most of them have been people who died decades, centuries, even millennia ago. And, I realize that of all the things that we can do that are worthwhile, of all the things that we can do that will last, there's really only two. maybe three. The third one is beyond most of us. We can have children. That's the most important thing. We can publish books, but they have to be books that are capable of standing the test of time, both in terms of their content and in terms of their physical being. An ebook is not going to last, most likely. But the higher quality a book is, sewn rather than glued, leather rather than paper that rips, archival, acid-free paper rather than paper that rots away. These are things that can last hundreds, even potentially thousands of years. I just finished reading a novel that was written in the early 11th century. It was written more than 1,000 years ago. The Tale of Genji. In talking with the Legal Legion, we were referring back to a strategic concept that was first introduced by Sun Tzu in The Art of War, which is even older. And so these things matter. These things absolutely matter. And so, anyhow, I was reading this book today, Pensées by Blaise Pascal, and it's really fascinating because Pascal, of course, is the great mathematician and physicist, but he's also known for being a religious philosopher, an apologist to a certain extent. And the amazing thing is he did all of this before the age of 30. And fortunately, he left us with these thoughts. Now, we're also publishing, and I've also been reading recently, the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. And now he didn't write his thoughts down until fairly late in life, as far as we can tell. But it occurred to me how important it was that these men had left their thoughts with us, however incomplete they might have been. T.S. Eliot, who wrote the introduction to this particular translation of Pensées, talks about how what Pascal had in mind was actually a much more concrete and structured work, probably something more on the scope, if not the scale, of Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologica. And it wouldn't have been a formal, structured, formulaic thing like Aquinas did, but it's clear that we're still very, very fortunate that he left us with these thoughts because they are profound. This is kind of interesting. Let me actually, I've got easier if I look it up here. I was at the gym today. It's always fun. You really feel like you're feeding both your body and your mind when you go to the gym and in between sets read something like Pascal or Aristotle or something worthwhile. For whatever reason, I actually find it easier to concentrate on more substantial literature, more substantial nonfiction when I'm working out. So anyhow, T.S. Eliot writes, "To understand the method which Pascal employs, the reader must be prepared to follow the process of the mind of the intelligent believer. The Christian thinker, and I mean the man who is trying to consciously and conscientiously explain to himself the sequence which culminated in faith, rather than the public apologist, proceeds by rejection and he finds its character inexplicable by any non-religious theory, or even alternative religious theory, I would add. Among religions, he finds Christianity and Catholic Christianity in this. He's talking about Pascal here, obviously. to account most satisfactorily for the world, and especially for the moral world within, and thus, by what Newman calls powerful and concurrent reasons, he finds himself inexorably committed to the dogma of the incarnation. To the unbeliever, this method seems disingenuous and perverse, because, of course, the unbeliever is looking at this as a logical syllogism from scratch. What Eliot is attempting to explain is that this is not the case. This is not, you're not starting from scratch. This is not philosophy 101. You're starting, this is practical and applied philosophy. It's not theoretical philosophy. It's not first foundations philosophy. So as a rule, the unbeliever is not so greatly troubled to explain the world to himself. Think about Darwin and the evolutionists. Well, things just evolve. Well, where did they come from? Well, evolution doesn't deal with that. Well, true, it doesn't deal with it directly, but it's still a necessary problem you have to solve. It's kind of interesting when you think about it. Unbelievers tend to think of the religious as those who, practice blind faith and don't think rationally about anything. What T.S. Eliot is pointing out is that the truth is precisely the opposite. And so he's not greatly distressed by its disorder, nor is he generally concerned in modern terms to preserve values. He does not consider that if certain emotional states, certain developments of character, and what in the highest sense can be called saintliness are inherently and by inspection known to be good, then the satisfactory explanation of the world must be an explanation which will admit the reality of those values. Now, this is the exact opposite from the way that I approach it, because I tend to approach it from evil rather than good. Nor does he consider such reasoning admissible. He's still talking about the unbeliever here. He would, so to speak, trim his values according to his cloth, because to him such values are of no great value. Of course, the atheist doesn't have any core values. So he can throw out anything that he happens to believe, he is perfectly happy to throw away. Because, well, it doesn't actually matter. That's the inherent nihilism that lies underneath. The unbeliever starts from the other end, as I was pointing out, and as likely as not with the question, is a case of human parthenogenesis credible? How could there be a virgin birth? And this is what he would call going straight to the heart of the matter. Now, Pascal's method is, on the whole, the method that is natural and right for the Christian. And the opposite method is that taken by Voltaire. Now, this is an interesting point here. This is very, very valuable for anyone who has to deal with atheists. It is worthwhile to remember that Voltaire, in his attempt to refute Pascal, has given once and for all the type of such refutation, and that later opponents of Pascal's apology for the Christian faith have contributed little beyond the argument from evil, because it's difficult to begin from good, because good is such a loaded term. Good is something that so many people can easily disagree on, and also the Christian concept of good is very readily confused with the human concept of good. That's why you get into these bizarre situations where people are trying to say, well, they try to create this false Euthyphro's dilemma, which boils down to, can you call God good? And the answer is yes, because God is the source of good. So there's no possible contradiction. It's just a tautology. God is good means that you have to define good in terms of God, not the other way around. And so, but evil is much more easy to define on some basic core levels. And here's the interesting thing is it doesn't really matter how you define it, because the Voltairean position ultimately has to be that evil does not exist in any objective sense. And that's very, very difficult for most people, including atheists, to accept. SJWs can't accept it. They believe very strongly in evil, even though most of them are atheistic, if not actual atheists. And so I found it very interesting that my approach to thinking about the matter is essentially the mirror image of Pascal's approach. It's just that he's starting from good, I'm starting from evil. But we wind up in precisely the same place, or very much the same place, because I'm not a Catholic, nor am I a Jansenist. So, let's go to this. That's the first thing that I noted. The next one that I noted was okay. This one just made me laugh. The majority of mankind is lazy-minded, incurious, absorbed in vanities and tepid in emotion, and is therefore incapable of either much doubt or much faith. I mean, that's such a beautiful and accurate description of most of the people with whom you communicate every day on a regular basis. They believe, but not very much. They have doubts, but not very deep. And when the ordinary man calls himself a skeptic or an unbeliever, that is ordinarily a simple pose, cloaking a disinclination to think anything out to a conclusion. Boom. K.O. Bear said, nothing new under the sun. Exactly. If you read my critiques of Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Michel Onfray, Sam Harris, what's the first thing that you notice? The first thing that you notice is these people can't think things through to any conclusion. The ineptitude of the new atheists was exceedingly striking. And so it's very amusing to me to read this 11 years after I wrote The Irrational Atheist, because that would have absolutely been a chapter heading quote that I would have used. It's just vastly amusing and so true, so absolutely true. Now this one is for all the people who don't understand my perspective on theology, why I'm not going to be debating Jay Dyer or anyone else about theology, and why I'm not particularly interested in it. So they're talking about this battle between the Jesuit order and a concept that was called Jansenism, which was essentially a very, very mild step towards Protestantism and salvation through grace. But I think this is a really intriguing observation here by T.S. Eliot. Though numerous theologians have set their wits at the problem, grace versus works, grace versus will, it ends in a mystery which we can perceive but not finally decipher. At least it is obvious that, like any doctrine, a slight excess or deviation to one side or the other will precipitate a heresy. The Pelagians, who were refuted by St. Augustine, emphasized the efficacy of human nature and belittled the importance of supernatural grace. The Calvinists emphasized the degradation of man through original sin and considered mankind so corrupt that the will was of no avail and thus fell into the doctrine of predestination. It was upon the doctrine of grace, according to St. Augustine, that the Jansenists relied, and the Augustinus of Jansenius was presented as a sound exposition of Augustinian views. Here's the interesting point. I mean, that's all very useful, but such heresies are never antiquated because they forever assume new forms. For instance, the insistence upon good works and service, which is the source of churchianity, which is preached from many quarters, or the simple faith that anyone who lives a good and useful life need have no morbid anxieties about salvation, is a form of Pelagianism. On the other hand, one sometimes hears announced the view that it will make no real difference if all the traditional religious sanctions for moral behavior break down, because those who are born and bred to be nice people will always prefer to behave nicely, and those who are not will behave otherwise in any case, and this is surely a form of predestination, for the hazard of being born a nice person or not is as uncertain as the gift of grace. And so, these arguments, these battles, this posturing is nothing new. It's not new at all. It's the same thing over and over and over and over again. And I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in, I mean, think about what we read and what we find useful. The arguments that we find useful and relevant are just the thoughts that Pascal, and I mean, keep in mind everything that I've shared with you so far, this is just from T.S. Eliot's introduction. Just the introduction of this book has been fantastic. Somebody said, please make sure that it's included in Castelia Deluxe. Maybe we will. I mean, I'd never seriously thought about it, and especially because it's already in the Franklin Library. Then again, if it is genuinely one of the 100 greatest books ever written, maybe we should think seriously about it. But let me finish reading it first before I even make any sort of determination. But the key thing is, we don't need yet another rehash of grace versus works and Pelagianism versus Calvinism and so forth. This book title is Pensées by Blaise Pascal with an introduction by T.S. Eliot. Yes, Pascal was Catholic. And so when you write down the stuff that you do know, not the stuff, not your arguments about things that we can never know for certain. And I don't care what any theologian says. I don't care if it's St. Augustine. I don't care if it's Aquinas. They are just offering conclusions, logical conclusions based on the foundation from Scripture or church dogma that they're relying upon. But it's of, I won't say absolutely no interest to me, but it's of very little interest to me, and it's of no practical use to me. And so I think that it's more viable for me to focus on the areas that are both of interest to me and that I think that somebody could find useful in 10 years. The social sexual hierarchy, for example, is going to be useful and be around for 2,000 years. It may end up being one of the most useful things that I ever write. Why? Because we can identify it in works that are, we can identify those male behavioral patterns in works that are 2,000 years old. You know, the other night I cited the example of Kaoru, the wealthy, attractive Gamma, who is nevertheless obsessed with attempting to impede the success of the Alpha Prince Nayu, and his bitterness that he's not as successful as Nayu, despite the fact that he's one of the wealthiest, most respected, most honored young men in all the empire. So, um, so I think that it's incredibly important for us to attempt to read, to understand, to preserve, and pass on the knowledge from the great minds of the past. And if we happen to be able to offer our own little addition to the mix, so much the better. You know, we can have ambitions to live on that way, but it doesn't matter. Marcus Aurelius taught us that. What difference does it make if um, if people remember us when we're dead 100, 200 years from now, because another 100 years or 200 years after that, they themselves will be dead. We can only live on through our children and through our books. And the third category, for those of you who are actually keeping track of this stuff, is the buildings. And of course, that's something that's been converged as well. You know, the modern architecture is not built to last. It's not built to be beautiful, and it will pass away. Thank God. So, um, and actually, that's something that I'll share with you is that I will have the first book on the sociosexual hierarchy coming out in the spring at some point in time. I actually hired a co-writer to go through all of my blogs on the subject and put them in some sort of readable framework that I can then rewrite. And so, um, you know, people have been asking me to do something on the sociosexual hierarchy for a long time, and I just didn't know how to get started on it because I couldn't bear the thought of going through all my old blog posts. I don't really like to read my own writing. Um, I don't like to revisit necessarily my past thinking. And I find that when I read my writing, I immediately go into edit rewrite mode, and that's not conducive to writing a book. And so I finally figured this out, and so it'll probably end up being about, I don't know, 60,000 words. It's going to be about, the first one's going to be about alpha. Second one will be about gamma, and then we will we will keep moving forward. Vox, is tepid your neologism? Yes. Tepid stands for tolerance, equality, progress, inclusivity, and diversity. John Yosarian said, so you're telling us some Gamma's comments will be immortalized in leather as an example to be laughed at for all eternity. Yeah, actually that may well be true. But and yes, for those of you who are concerned, I am still working on A Sea of Skulls. It will be out next year. And so that's important to me, but that's really something I do more for fun. It's more for me. The fact that others happen to enjoy it is great, but and the other thing too that's important to keep in mind is that thanks to the audiobook, A Throne of Bones is now something that we can consider one of my successful books commercially. But, you know, most people don't buy $35 950-page books. And it's actually kind of an insane way to try to sell books. When you think about it, the way that you're supposed to sell books these days is do ebooks and crank them out every month, and just feed the beast. And it's just not. That's not of interest to me. But again, I need to, as an editor, as a husband and father, I have to spend time. I have to devote a certain amount of time to the stuff that pays the bills. And so, the reality is that things like corporate cancer, things like SJWs Always Lie, my nonfiction tends to sell better than my fiction. Somebody asked me, has asked me, is your fiction or your nonfiction better? Well, I'm not the right person to ask. If you compare my fiction to the fiction writers of today, my fiction is much better than most, no question. Most people find A Throne of Bones, Summa Helvetica, etc., to be better than George Martin, better than the other fantasy that's out there. Not as good as Tolkien, obviously. Not as good as Susan Cooper. But on the fiction side, who are you comparing it to? And how can you compare it to, would I compare it favorably to Pascal? No, definitely not. Would I compare it favorably to Sam Harris? Yes, obviously. But, so I leave that to, everybody else. And it's not, it's not my call. It's your call. And what I can say is that I write nonfiction more naturally. Is December the month we can get Meditations via Deluxe? No, Meditations is the January, February book. Remember, each book is 2 months. So, Legionnaire Bear said, didn't you say you enjoy writing fiction more? It really depends on the moment. I mean, I really do enjoy writing fiction, but I also find it more frustrating. So, what about gamma authors to ignore? Well, the very worst gamma author, and the one that I find completely unreadable, is Patrick Rothfuss. I tried 3 times to read The Name of the Wind, and I never got very far into it. It's just unreadable. And so, who voices your audio? Depends on the book. Bob Allen voices my nonfiction. He does a great job. He's the one who did SJWs Always Lie, Corporate Cancer, etc. And Jeremy Daw voices my Selenoth books. He's doing Summa Helvetica now. He's already done A Throne of Bones, which is fantastic. 31 hours. It's crazy. And then, and he actually just did City Beyond Time, which is probably going to be next month's Patreon book. So Quantum Mortis. And then there's a woman named Yuka something or other who did Quantum Mortis. I wanted a female voice for that, and she did a really good job. Who is the smartest Gamma you know of, dead or living? Probably Friedrich Nietzsche. China Mieville, have people made the comparison? China Mieville is better than I am. I mean, nobody's made that comparison, but I would absolutely put China Mieville, John C. Wright, and Neil Stephenson ahead of me. I mean, keeping in mind that the science fiction community would put literally the entire science fiction community ahead of me, but their opinion doesn't count. They're mediocre hacks at best. Is there an update on the Big Bear comic? Oh, it's done. We just have to get around to it. We've been busy. Saltwater Bear confirms Audible for Throne of Bones was awesome. Yeah, I'm a reader rather than an audiobook guy myself. I mean, I do listen to audiobooks when we're on in the car for a while, but I really highly recommend the experience. I think it's a really great way to experience that story, which is kind of a bizarre thing for me to say. Mike says, now that I'm used to you speaking, I prefer your voice for nonfiction. I don't have the delivery. I don't have the stamina at the mic. And also I have a sibilant S that would be incredibly annoying over time in an audiobook. I actually did start reading the very first chapter of SJWs Always Lie. I don't think I even recorded more than the first page when I realized it wasn't going to work. So, plus, when you've got such a pro like Bob Allen, I mean, I send him the text and we get the finished recording like 24 hours later. He's the consummate. D Live while the replays are up, and on this channel they'll be available here indefinitely for Silver Pack channel members and up. So, here's an interesting question I have to address just because I like the question. Trent asks, how does IQ affect a person's ability to write fiction? I've heard Martin Ami say that brainy people tend not to be as good at fiction. That's correct, because they tend to be of the mathematical mind. To turn things back to Blaise Pascal, they are of the mathematical mind more than they are of the intuitive mind. The intuitive mind is much better for writing novels. Now, you can get to the level that if you're smart enough, you can actually, to a certain extent, simulate or emulate that, which is what I do. But we'll get into that another time. So anyhow, so if you aren't able to subscribe or you don't wish to subscribe, you can still watch all the dark streams and all the Big Bear streams on BitChute. But I would encourage you to subscribe to Unauthorized if you haven't done so yet. Look forward to seeing you all the next time. I'm Vox Day. This is the Darkstream.